My name is John Harpham. I'm a lecturer in social studies at Harvard University. Social studies is an interdisciplinary honors concentration in the social sciences. I'm an intellectual historian and political theorist. My work focuses on ideas about slavery and freedom and race across the Atlantic world, and the relationship between those ideas and the practices of enslavement and resistance in the Atlantic world as well. And at the moment, I'm at work on a 3-volume series about the ideas associated with the origins, development, and eventual abolition of slavery across the Anglo-American Atlantic world. And the first volume in that series, titled The Intellectual Origins of American Slavery, will come out with Harvard University Press on October 1st of this year. It gives evidence of a couple things. One is that the map is French, the text is in French, and Tocqueville was French. Democracy in America is the most important work ever written in the tradition of American political thought, but it was written by a Frenchman. And you could argue that it's really a work about France more than it is about America. And so the map gives evidence of that perspective on America. It's a perspective on America delivered by someone who understood himself to be something of an outsider. But also, it is a map of all of what we would today describe as North America, not all of which was part of the United States of America when Tocqueville was here. And his 2 volumes, Democracy in America, came out in 1835 and 1840. And so the size of the nation then was much less than half of what it is today, which is a reminder again that when Tocqueville describes America, we sometimes take him to be describing the eternal character of the nation in which we live. He's describing a small part of it a long time ago. And as much insight as we can draw from Tocqueville's work, and I think we can draw a lot that still remains important today, it is also important to remember that Tocqueville was describing not only a different time, but a much smaller place than the America that we live in today. Well, I come from a school that says that if you pay close attention to a book that is meant to be read closely, then you can get a lot out of that encounter. And you don't have to go too far afield in order to get the sense of the text itself if you pay close attention to it. At the same time, yeah, a basic familiarity with the concepts of political theory and the terms and debates and the structure of American politics would be useful, but that's probably widely shared among all of these Hertog alumni who are in the know. And so actually, I think Democracy in America will be readily accessible to any Hertog alum who is interested in the course. And I'll be teaching to every student, not just to students who take themselves to be experts in the field. So this course is titled Tocqueville's Democracy in America. And on one level, the course is very simple. We're going to read a great and important book very closely over the course of 5 sessions. Now, it's a long book too, so we won't be reading it that slowly, but we'll be reading it carefully and reading it the way that great books should be read and that great books were meant to be read, which is that we'll be reading it carefully, slowly, quizzically, critically, reflectively, appreciatively. So on one level, it's a course about a book, and what we'll do is straightforward. We'll just read it. on another level, it's of course about the theme of the book. And we are as concerned with the topic of democracy in America as Tocqueville was. And we will be reflecting on past, present, and future of American democracy. Tocqueville lays bare some themes that that never go away in American politics and American culture. And so we'll be drawing out some of the insights that he developed all the way back there in the 19th century and try to extend them and apply them and reflect on them as they relate to the practice and culture of American democracy today. So those are the two levels on which this course will work. On the one hand, it's close reading the book, and as Hertog alumni, I'm sure you've all done that before and enjoyed it. And on the other hand, it will work at the level of a seminar about some of the most important themes and topics of the day. So for Tocqueville, democracy is the fact of modern life. And it would be a mistake to even try to resist it or to criticize it. It's like a wave crashing upon a shore. And Tocqueville studies America because one reason for Tocqueville's intense interest in America is that he believes that it's the nation in which the movement of democracy it's the nation on which the wave of democracy has crashed first. And it's a nation, he also believes, that was born in democracy. It didn't have to undergo a revolution to become democratic. And so obviously at some level, the book is about democracy, but you also want to know what Tocqueville means by democracy. And it's something a little bit different from what we might mean by that term. It's more or less equality of conditions. And so Tocqueville is very interested in what that means and the effects that it has on American life. He's also interested in the effects that it has on government and popular rule. How does the equality of conditions, broad equality of people, have an effect on popular sovereignty of a nation? How do the people rule in a country in which the people are understood to be more or less equal? So that concerns him. He's very interested in that throughout the book. But Tocqueville's real priority is not so much democracy, it's liberty. And what Tocqueville the problem he sets out to solve in this book is not so much what democracy is or what will come from it. It's what will be the relationship between democracy and liberty. And this concerns him because on the one hand, certainly he thinks that democracy is conducive to liberty. It's a crucial element of modern liberty, actually. But on the other hand, and these are some of the tensions that Tocqueville starts to get into as the book goes on, and especially as he transitions from the first volume to the second volume. He thinks that democracy also has this deep tendency to threaten liberty. And so the two central modern values come into conflict: equality and liberty. Tocqueville tries to reconcile these values, but he also worries that they might ultimately be irreconcilable. And so the book leaves you with this tension, not so much with a straightforward statement or endorsement of any one position, but with a deep set of concerns that never disappear and that Tocqueville thinks will never disappear in American politics. Since this book was written, and since it became a publishing sensation across the Atlantic world, students of American democracy have looked to this book as a guide for insight, to provide a vocabulary, to lay out the basic terms and the structure of American politics. For generations after, upon generations, people who have been concerned with democracy in America in the present or in their present have gone back to the book Democracy in America, to Tocqueville's present. So we'll be participating in that very long tradition of thinking about American democracy by means of the book Democracy in America. And there's no time more appropriate to do so than the present, especially with the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence coming up just next year. There's no time more appropriate to think deeply about democracy in America than right now. It offers, on the one hand, a good introduction to the structure of the American political system, to the Constitution, to the Declaration, to federalism, to judicial review, to the whole array of institutions and, to all of the elements of the American political system. Any study of the American political system is going to have to run through Tocqueville's Democracy in America at some point. And so that'll be useful. But probably more importantly, Tocqueville offers perhaps the most penetrating analysis ever written of the character of the American political system, not just its structure, but its deep structure, the spirit that animates it, and works to describe the spirit of the American people that is at the center of the practice of democracy in America. The book is actually not too much concerned. It's not overly concerned with the structure of the American political system. What it's much more concerned with is the character of the American people. And from Tocqueville's time to ours, America has changed dramatically. We're all very aware of those changes. But there's some deep feature of the American character that Tocqueville describes that rings true to the present day. And so we want to figure out precisely what that is. In fact, whether over the centuries that separate Tocqueville from us, we can still speak coherently about the character of the American people on which the future of the nation will always rest. Tocqueville believed that Americans have two essential, passionate desires. On the one hand, the desire for liberty, to be sure, and on the other hand, the desire for equality. And the two, Tocqueville was careful to admit, sometimes run up against each other. And when they do, and this is one of the characteristic Tocquevillian insights, the passion for equality sometimes trumps the desire for liberty. The Americans desire equality more than they seem to desire liberty. And in their desire for equality, they are sometimes willing to infringe upon liberty. And that worries Tocqueville, as I think it might worry us. I think it's not wrong to put Tocqueville alongside John Stuart Mill, a rough contemporary of the 19th century, and say that for Tocqueville, freedom primarily consists in the capacity to develop one's own plan of life and to pursue it, however unusual it might be, and however uncommon or unpopular it might be as well. You know, Tocqueville was a French aristocrat, and um, he was concerned by the passion for equality that he saw among the Americans, as a French aristocrat would be. So I am a political theorist. Um, I have been trained as a political theorist in departments of political science since I was an undergraduate. So I am well versed in the common methods of the political theory seminar and appreciate them very much. At the same time, over time, I've become more and more of a historian. I don't say that to mean that the methods of the political theory seminar are illegitimate, in which we push ideas back and forth and move back and forth between time periods and contexts and extract, you know, certain essential concepts from a text and then bat them around like a tennis ball. I love that. What could be better? However, I do think that seminars like this one can be enriched by some historical context. And as a historian of this period, and certainly a historian of many of the topics covered in this course, part of what I'll bring as the leader of the seminar is short lectures, just short lectures about the historical context in which Tocqueville was writing. We can use that not to keep us down or to kind of prevent us from conceptual speculation, but rather as a point of departure from which we can build our own ideas with more vividness and immediacy. So there are two main points of connection between my own research and the book we'll cover in this course. The first is that if you are an historian of slavery, as I am, you are also a historian of liberty, because slavery and liberty, slavery and freedom have, across the Western tradition, always been understood in the closest possible relationship to each other. Slavery has most often been seen as the absence of liberty, and liberty has been seen as the absence of slavery, which is to say, to study the one is to study the other. And indeed, I think to study the history of liberty is also necessarily to study the history of slavery. So Tocqueville, very interested in liberty. And that means he's also very interested in the practice of slavery. And that's the second connection between my work and the topic of this course. I'm a historian of liberty. I'm also a historian of slavery, as is Tocqueville. Some of the most important reflections on the history of slavery ever to be written about in the American context appear right at the end of the first volume of Tocqueville's Democracy in America. And that is part of the book that I think it's important, and which I will put into the context of American history. Tocqueville is not so much original in what he says about the relationship between slavery, freedom, and equality in America, but he is characteristic of a certain period in American history. And what I try to show in the course of my own scholarship is how that period, how those ideas came to be, what came before them, what came after them, and the particular set of issues that Tocqueville believed he was involved in. In other words, I want to understand, and in the course we will work to understand, in what context Tocqueville came to understand or came to think about the history of slavery. When Tocqueville thought about slavery, what did he think about? What were the essential concerns? In the course of working them out, Tocqueville came upon the issue of slavery. And I think that's very important in order to understand the essential thoughts that he delivers about the history of slavery at the end of that first volume. So in other words, there are two main points of connection between my work and Tocqueville's Democracy in America. On the one hand, I'm a historian of liberty, as is Tocqueville. That's his most important value. On the other hand, I'm an historian of slavery, as is Tocqueville. Tocqueville takes slavery, the existence of slavery in America, to be one of the main threats to the future of democracy in America. It leads him to call into question, I think, even the bare fact of whether America is a democracy, whether the term is appropriate in that context. And those are, that's the basic way in which my own scholarship will inform our seminar. I mean, as any American political theorist has, I've encountered this book time and again, to such an extent that I can't even remember the first time that I encountered it. But it was a long time ago at this point. And I've encountered it in different settings, in seminars, as a student, as a teacher, in the school year, over the summers, in libraries, in my office, in office hours, reading on the, on public transportation, and in my own scholarship as well. So I've read this book in almost any context you could read a book. And my relationship to it has changed over time in the following way. First time you encounter a book like this, like Democracy in America, like any of the classics of political theory, you encounter it whole, I think. You try to take it all in. You put it under a single title and try to reduce it to maybe a single idea that you can then use and kind of use as a shorthand in order to move forward to the next. And over time, to be sure, that was the way that I first started to think about Tocqueville's Democracy in America. But over time, especially in the course of teaching it many times, I've come to think of the book as best understood as a series of different thoughts, as a sequence of different ideas, which are in some sense in a relationship with one another, but also in tension with one another over the course of the text. And so I think by the end of reading this book closely, as we will over the summer, you don't so much emerge with a single undifferentiated kind of perfect whole of a book. What you emerge from it with is like the sequence of thoughts, the method by which Tocqueville goes about thinking about American democracy, and the close tensions that the book introduces, and we'll see if it ever resolves them. Well, I think one thing I'll say is that it would be possible to read Tocqueville just at a surface level and think that he was describing the unchanging, essential, enduring character of American democracy, as if it was just a locked-in feature of this geographical formation called America. That's not the case. The more you read this book, the more you realize that democracy, according to Tocqueville, is a principle of motion and a principle of development over time. And what he's describing is the impulses, the momentum that really make democracy what it is. And as Americans living in the 21st century, nothing could be clearer to us than that American democracy is not a fixed point in the past or at our origins or in the present or in the future. It is a principle of motion. It is always in motion. Its character is always changing and always debated. And in that sense, we look back productively to this work from the 19th century, not so much in order to tell us what American democracy is, the one thing it is, but rather in order to remind us that American democracy is always being created. Well, I myself have a book coming out in the falls, and so I'm well aware that books are still being, from time to time, written and a little bit less frequently being purchased and read as well. And so I still think Tocqueville, I mean, look at this book. That would be the longest tweet in human history. So yeah, I think Tocqueville would still be writing books. What would he say? It's not a question for me to decide. That's a question we're going to be asking ourselves all summer. Yeah, what would this most careful observer of American democracy say about the state of our nation today? That's not a question I'm going to ever decide for a student of mine, but it is a question that I hope to give all of my students the resources to answer.